On Wednesday's Morning Focus, we were joined by Cathal Crowe. The Mealich Fianna Fáil TD was refuting reports he called for the reinstatement of the Shannon Airport stopover rule. The rule which compelled transatlantic flights to the Republic to stop at the Clare Airport was ended in 2008 following the EU-US Open Skies Agreement. According to the trade publication Travel Extra, Deputy Crowe recently called for legislation demanding the flight stop at Shannon in line with the stopover rule, which led to the CEO of the DAA, Kenny Jacobs, describing any resurrection of the rule as bizarre. I'm joined now by the owner of Travel Extra, Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Alan. Love the programme.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that, and thank you for joining us. Can you explain from your perspective where Travel Extra's report, in which you claim Deputy Crowe called for that legislation demanding flight stop at Shannon, stemmed from?
I'm really, really fascinated by what Cathal said the other morning. Like all the things he said, a lot of what he says makes eminent sense, pleading the case for Shannon. Where it really was astonishing was on 3 separate occasions in his 12-minute interview, he was bad-mouthing Travel Extra. We didn't mention anything about the stopover. The stopover didn't arise in our report. It's a summary of an interview he did with Joe Murray. It's part of what we do every morning. We do about 20 of the travel takes for our specialist aviation and travel audience, and here he was saying, I didn't call for the stopover. He's the one who brought it up. Neither myself in our report or Kenny Jacobs in his LinkedIn post said he called for the return of the stopover. So he's going around with pleading, I'm hurt that somebody said I called for the stopover. We didn't, and the interview with Joe Murray quite didn't mention it either. It's something he's saying that somebody else is accusing him of, and having produced the accusation himself. All of that is a bit... It was astonishing because, you know, there's a very strong contemporary debate about the role of Shannon in modern aviation and aviation policy and all of that. It diverts completely away from the key subject. Really important, Alan. I'm taking the, you know, I'm not unused to the cut and thrust of these things, but when it comes out of Clare, I sort of take it personally. My father is Clare, my mother's Milton Malbay. My 4 grandparents are Clare, 8 great-grandparents and 16 great-grandparents. I have not any contaminated blood in my body. I do have 2 cousins that play for the Limerick hurling team, but their mother is Clare. I feel Clare really, really close to my heart. And I was down in Dromoland only a month ago, talking to Clare Tourism Forum about how to get more tourism into Clare, how to get more investment in, how to boost Clare's profile internationally, drawing on my international experience.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying.
All of this comes out of my love for the county, so I was taken aback.
Okay, I take your point that you feel you wouldn't say anything that you feel would harm tourism in Clare. So, I mean, you know, when Cathal says he's refuting that he called for any legislation demanding the resurrection of the stopover rule, and that if you let me finish. But he also said that he said he hadn't been contacted by Travel Extra for comment. From your perspective, do you feel you didn't have to contact him because your position is you weren't the one that raised the issue?
No, the story wasn't a story about Cahill's case. It was a summary of what is happening in the day, as is happening this morning. You know, with 20 different major travel stories floating around, including the very interesting, which is relevant to Clare, about the short-term rental market. So it's the equivalent, Alan, of what your news bulletin would do for the specialist audience. People pick up what is going on in the international world of aviation and travel. It was interesting it's a very short summary, by the way. It's from Joe Murray's interview. And what really triggered a little bit was that when he uses the word compelling, using the slot system, I think his case is you use the slot system to compel airlines or aircraft to land in Shannon. And I think that's what triggered alarm, but not just amongst me and my followers in Travel Extra, but also through the aviation industry. The word compel is really, that's where probably, it resonates with what went before, because the Shannon stopover was something of its time. It comes from a different era. But if you're talking about forcing people to use Shannon, it is not really a solution to anything. In fact, it's something that would raise alarm bells for every single airline and aviation person that is in the international industry.
And I'm interested in that point. Just for people, again, Cathal said that rather than looking for the reinstatement of the stopover, he's instead calling for the Irish Aviation Authority to be cognizant of regional development in line with Project Ireland 2040 plan that he wants to see a change in national policy that would see the IAA make more regionally balanced decisions when granting slots to airline. He used the example of the Dublin to Schiphol Amsterdam route flights, that if even a couple of those were sent to Shannon, that it would be hugely beneficial to the region to have that connectivity to a hub like Schiphol. I put it to him that, and it's something Kenny Jacobs said, compelling airlines to take up regional routes if they want slots at Dublin would be misguided as 1980s thinking. And I put it to him, well, if the IAA were to compel or airlines to do that, maybe would it lead to them just dropping the slots they have at Dublin as well, or taking a Dublin or nowhere approach?
That's exactly what would happen. They would run. It happens in Africa, by the way. You do get African politicians saying, oh, we're going to force people to use this airport or that airport. Airlines pull out. They just say, okay, we have to make commercial decisions. And Amsterdam to Shannon was a route. It didn't work. Amsterdam to Paris was a route. It didn't work. There are lots of people, airlines have come in, had a punt, had a look at it, said, we can't do it. There is... if Shannon, and there's a big, the question for Shannon's survival is that it's not viable. It's not, most of the routes that people would run into Dublin are not even remotely possible to run to Shannon because of profitability. Okay, that doesn't mean you shut down Shannon. That means that you, like as on the Irish Hotel Federation, when I was speaking up there, I said we have 8 airlines in airports in the country. Really, only 3 of them are commercially viable, and the rest will probably need support. And it's right. There is a really strong case with regional aviation policy to give them the support, the way that the PSA routes are used to support Kerry and Donegal. First thing that should be done with Shannon is raise the funding cap, not the Dublin Airport passenger cap unrelated to it, but I think you've discussed it on your programme that it doesn't qualify for a funding cap. It would be possible under EU legislation, but the Irish government has set a lower funding cap in. Shannon will need to have their routes subsidised, subsidising aviation routes because of the benefits it brings to the regions is possible. But you don't look to the airlines to subsidise it. That's where Cahill's point doesn't make sense at all. Airlines are not going to subsidise anything. They pay, an aircraft costs, 120 million euro. It has to make about 4 million euro a year. No airline is going to put an aircraft in Shannon when it's losing money, when it needs to pay back for the cost of the aircraft and all the other costs. That's the sort of breakdown in the proposal that Cahill is making. You can't get, if subsidies are going to come in, they're going to have to come in at regional and government level. That happens quite, frequently through Europe. A lot of the regional airports are subsidised by local government in Spain and Italy, where they're far more devolved powers than they have here, and by national governments elsewhere. That's the future of Shannon, but they're not going to get it from the airlines. I can tell you now what would happen is people would run from Ireland altogether, choking Dublin, with the passenger cap and saying, oh yeah, let's keep the passenger cap, because some of the Clare politicians have been on air on RTE with 1 or 2 of them have said that's a great idea because it would boost Shannon. It won't. The routes tend to go to places like Manchester, and choking Dublin is bad for Clare.
So you think the passenger cap should be raised on? Something has to be done, though, doesn't it? Because even if the majority of airlines, in this situation, if the IAA said to them, you have to send some routes or some of your flights down to Shannon or Cork or wherever it might be, Dublin having 85% market share is not healthy for the likes of Shannon Airport and Cork Airport, but it's not healthy for Dublin either.
It is. I mean, it's normal in smaller countries There are 5 countries where the main airport would have 100% of the capacity. Malta would be familiar to a lot of Shannon. We've had the Shannon route for a few years. Then there's 4 or 5 that are 90%: Hungary, Finland, Czech Republic, 80% Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and Copenhagen is about 89%, Amsterdam's 86%, Vienna's 88%. Then you've got the 70s, which would include Stockholm and Sweden. Ireland's quite unusual because while we're the same size as Austria, the 32 counties are the same size as Austria. Vienna would have an 88% share of all Austrian traffic. Dublin would have 70%. Belfast, 2 airports, would have 12% between them, and the rest then is divided, of which Shannon is 4. It's not that unusual nationally, and where you do get, Romania is a good example. Orania Airport, and you'd have Romania, a lot of Romanian listeners would be very familiar with it. Just back from an aviation conference there, Orania is choking. Just can't, it doesn't have the infrastructure Dublin has put in, but it still gets most of the traffic because Cluj and places like that they're not attractive enough for airlines, and Romania's roads are terrible. As anyone who's been there will tell you, it's like Dublin was, or like Ireland was, when you had to go over that level crossing in Tipperary to drive to Clare. What really, Shannon's big numbers, 3.6 million in 2006, were already in decline before the end of the Celtic Tiger. And after 2010, obviously, we had a motorway all the way to Dublin. So motorways do make a difference, but that doesn't mean that Shannon doesn't have a future and doesn't have a very strong place to play in regional airports. It's just not going to work that airlines are compelled to fly loss-making routes because they won't do so.
Okay, and you've made a very cogent argument on that, and we're almost out of time, but I do want to quickly ask you about, and it's something I put to Cathal as well, that we've seen the recent US federal government figures, sharp falls in passengers flying there from European countries, including from Ireland, just in terms of Shannon Airport and its direct services to the US. Should we be concerned? Should Shannon Airport be concerned over any potential pressure on transatlantic air travel this year?
Yes, because Shannon is an inbound route. 70% of what travels are inbound into Ireland. So the airlines will look at that. They will try and keep their trunk routes, their Heathrows, their Charles de Gaulle's. And Dublin is in that league, by the way. It's the 5th biggest. Cause for concern. The cause for concern really isn't Trump and the tariffs and all the stuff that's making the headlines. I'm just back from the Discover New England Tourism Forum in Boston, in Rhode Island, and but their big concern there is the stock exchange. Americans follow it very closely. If they stop spending because the stock exchange isn't going right for them and their pensions and everything like that, we're going to have a problem with inbound tourism into Ireland. The American tourists saved our summer for the last 3 summers because of their high spend, the strength of the dollar. We need them, and Shannon needs those transatlantic services. Cause for concern, but that's a case for another day.
Okay, we will watch this space. Eoghan, looking forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Eoghan Corry there, the owner of Travel Extra, with us on Morning Focus.